Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon. Well, this episode is a departure from conversations about practice, conversations to reveal the qualities and character of an individual's practice. So in a way, this is a conversation that you'll hear that I had with myself. I looked at the date, June 20th, and it was a year ago, according to my notes, that Peter and I decided that we needed to adapt our practice of notes on practice and thinking about practice from writing to the spoken word and recorded word. In other words, I said, hey, Peter, maybe we should try podcasting. And I recall Peter laughing and saying, what? Pod what? Podcasting. But he was a good sport. And a few weeks after that day, we had our first recordings. Primitive by any production standard, but gems when you think about it now that we can't hear Peter's live voice any longer. So this one I'm having a moment to try out a theme. It's called Living a Practice Life. And I dug into what I thought that meant to me and brought out that paper for this recording. Don't get scared. When I say paper, it's one sheet of paper with some bullets on it. And I'll tell you about each one briefly, I promise. But overall, what I think you'll hear is the importance of knowing that you and I, own our practices. They're created, developed, sustained, even abandoned by our own sheer will. And joy, if you take it a little further, joyful, because it feels right to be doing something in an ever better way. Now for me, ever better is a teeny little quarter of an inch of gain most of the time. But it always feels good when I take it a little further, a little deeper, or try something that I've never done before, like this podcast series. So think about living a practice life as a choice that can't be made for us, that we make for ourselves. And the thoughts that I share are just my thoughts. Imagine the tens of millions of such thoughts that people could generate if they knew what Peter and I knew when we got this podcast series going. That we teachers can only create a context and some inducements for a person to learn and grow. But all the learning and growing is done from the inside out. And so we need to favor that reality with how we design our interactions as teachers, or as friends, or as parents, or as coaches. Respect the fact that everyone who wants to is living a practice life. This is Dave Fearon. June 20th, 2020. It's 1 year to this very date that Peter Vale and I decided that we needed to proceed with our collaboration as a podcast, because writing and revising a manuscript, which he originally titled My Notes on Practice, was becoming too difficult given Peter's restricted condition. And so we were off on an adventure. We were adapting with something which would be very new for both of us. So what kept us at it? Why didn't we just throw in that proverbial tower and say, I guess until something happens that makes things work better at the keyboard, we can't go forward with this initiative to bring the nature of practice to the attention of readers and now listeners. So off I went trying to figure out how to make this work. I learned how to adapt Zoom recordings so that Peter and I could be able to collaborate with some ease for him, and also while we were having our conversations, make eye contact, which I found very, very important for both of us. And gradually, through most of July, until we had our first recording, and soon after, I was learning as I went, getting a lot of help from a technologist at my former university, but I had to learn how to do it for myself, because it was going to be my practice. Podcasting would become my practice in order to have the larger goal met. And Peter took to this format as the ever teacher that he was. And early, you'll hear in the early episodes, sound quality is not too great. My editing skills were pretty primitive. But by the time you reach this particular episode, a year after we started, hopefully it's still homemade, but you will feel that it's made with heart and with real concern that anything you hear on this podcast will somehow make you feel more encouraged about pursuing your practices, setbacks or not, pandemic or not, cash or no cash. What is it about we who choose a life with practice as a prominent feature that makes us keep going? Peter would say, "Oh, Dave, don't be too melodramatic here, but perhaps it's spirit. Perhaps because practice comes from within and grows the person within which the practice resides is why we keep going." And so I've broken the pattern of making every one of these episodes a conversation with at least one other person, or three when Peter was involved. I will make this, I don't know what to call it. It's not an interlude. It's a pause to acknowledge a year of growth and creativity, saddened when Peter could no longer go forward in life, but encouraging in that people seem to be interested in what we brought forth. And so I'll give you some thoughts about what I've learned about practice. And I'm going to keep going on learning more, primarily in conversation with practitioners. First, I'll acknowledge our way of thinking, which was the underpinnings of all of the conjectures that Peter had written and which we discussed in our conversations. And it still works for me. Practice is the conscious ability fairly consistently to produce intended results, and to do so across a range of circumstances, and to do so while growing and changing oneself to meet the changing circumstances in which one's practice exists. First, I want to note the generosity of the thought, fairly consistently achieving results, recognizing that it's not a straight line, and there are times when we fall short, and those are actually times when we are energized to get up and figure out what we didn't do that we didn't know, and learn it and go ahead and do what we now know will get us our results. So that fairly consistently is a very thoughtful qualification for this part of the definition, and to do so across a range of circumstances. So the more you're out and about, as we say in my native Maine, the more circumstances you enter, and challenge you to notice. And once you do, you have to adapt if the circumstances no longer allow you to stay with your normal patterns. The good news here in this definition is that as you meet these circumstances, you change and grow oneself. That's the key. While we would love to believe that we teachers teach you to grow, or ministers or doctors or anyone else who is external to you does something to make you change for the better. No, it's my belief that we do the growing, we do the changing. We sure as heck can use some inducements and some coaching and really good theory, but we do the growing. Why? Because we are consistently, consciously producing results that are increasingly more challenging, and therefore we have so much more pride in accomplishment. So that's the first thought to share on this June anniversary of when Peter and I decided that podcasting was and had to be the way to go. The changing circumstances allowed me to find this particular path forward. So let me think a little bit further aloud. At another place in Peter's introduction to his notes on practice, he said, so practice as a particular form of behavior, keyword, repeatedly performs certain learned abilities in relation to certain values and standards to achieve intended results as the fruits of those performances. It's so elegant. Repeatedly performs certain learned abilities until they don't work quite the way you intended them to do, so you learn new abilities or you modify the abilities that you have. But values and standards, others' values and other standards, certainly, depending on the practice, but always your own values and your own standards have the strongest, I believe, grip on your determination to achieve those results and reap the fruits of those performances. And they're sweet as anything when you think now, as I do, that Peter and I started out a year ago and started recording our thoughts. Now we have a web page. We have a series on every possible platform for listening to podcasts. We are together still in spirit on this, and therefore I keep Peter's name on this series and his picture in our logo, because everything I do going forward is because of him, and deep down inside of me, I feel it's with him. So please allow me to share some notes on my practice that I created while Peter and I were still collaborating. And I shared them with him, not in a podcast, but I sent out a Word document with these in it because I was going to use them with a workshop that I ran for New England town clerks. The title was Living a Practice Life. And he liked that. And he liked my thoughts. But we didn't get back to them to record our conversation about them. So here they are with a bit of editing as I go along. I ask, what is there about being in practice that makes me different? Practice is mine. Choosing to be a person in practice, I'm working on this practice as an enterprise, uniquely of my own making. An enterprise that by my constant endeavors is making me the fulfilled and valued person I intend to be. I guess being in a business school teaching organizational behavior all those years got me thinking about enterprise. But I like that idea too, because social enterprise is something I believe in deeply, and we are, in a sense, our own social enterprise. We are growing ourselves to become more relevant, more rewarded, and to matter in the world. And therefore, Practice is mine. Practice is my primary teacher. Only I can know from well-considered experience what works to propel me forward. Ultimate responsibility for my own success leads me to enlist those who teach me in common cause. Mine is to discover deeper meanings in the ebb and flow of my practice experience. Theirs is to render knowledge with a prospect of enhancing my practice, thereby also learning new ways of teaching. Practice is my primary teacher. Inside Knowledge, a book that I wrote with Stephen Cavallari about 15 years ago, focused on that notion of how pragmatism, the philosophy of pragmatism, makes each of us an investigator of our lives, a scientist, if you will, small s, looking at everything we do as a form of experiment in what will work now that may have not worked before, or worked before but won't work now. We get that feedback from life, from the moment, and that works on our responsibility to let our practice teach us something. Oh, I can't tell you how many hard lessons I learned, and I'm still learning to produce a podcast like this. It never ends to amaze me of how, I wish the hell I'd thought of that before. Thank goodness I've had a young colleague, Anthony Rivera, who'd stepped in and helped me from mid-fall on to get this thing up to a better level. So in a way, Anthony became my teacher. And since he was just learning to produce podcasts and help with finishing it up and giving it a good web page, he was learning and I was his teacher. So that was a great collaboration. And if it had not occurred, I don't think I'd be talking right now to you about anything related to being a podcaster. Practice is my spirit at work, my spirit at work, my spirit working within me, not just on the job at work. My desire to accomplish and excel animates my performances. So there I'm back to a moment ago when I said that it was spirit that kept Peter and me going when it became ever more difficult. There were times when Peter was in such pain during the middle of a conversation that we'd pause and he'd have to fight that pain down and maybe even take a pain tablet just so we could continue. That desire to continue was not anything but pure spirit on Peter's part. So practice is my spirit at work. Practice shows me the real me. This one, practice shows me the real me, my beliefs, my values, my preferences, my attitudes. It's when I apply myself to something that matters to me at the practice level. That's when I find out what humility means and real joy at accomplishment means. But boy, I put it to the test now. Peter and I would kid a bit about how I undertook the practice of golf early in our collaboration in that particular summer. We talked about it while we were recording. Golf, I played at golf, but at some moment I became a golfer. I don't mean that I was racking up great scores. I just found myself looking forward to what I'd learn about myself next at the fourth tee and how I was going to improve on what I did the last time I was at that tee, the day before or a week before. And if I hit a lousy shot, would I take a mulligan and hit another one if I were alone? Or would I say, all right, you dribble that one down to the bottom of the hill, play it from there. That's a real test of values. And once in a while, I took a mulligan. But here, practice brings out the best in me. All I am, all I know, all I believe, all I value is combined and sustained in what I do in a practiced way. Remember, practice is behavior. It's not a label, a badge, a shingle on outside your door. Those things are reflective of the fact that you have a behavior, a pattern of behavior, which you can call something: golf, podcasting, teaching, but doing it regularly, practicing at it until you get better, brings out the best in you yet. Good news is there's always more that you can do in a line of practice to bring out even more of the best in you yet. Boy, is that encouraging. As I just turned 77, there's more I can do to grow me. That's pretty nice to hear, even though I'm saying it myself. Practice adapts me as I learn to adapt my practice. You see, back to that original way of thinking that Peter says, we learn and we grow ourselves by meeting changing circumstances. So in that regard, practice is the great adapter. It's not something we can rent or buy or put on. It comes from within. And we adapt by trying to keep on doing what we want to keep on doing, no matter what. And that no matter what is why we have to be creative, why we have to change our behavior, our relationships, our language, our technology to adapt. Or sometimes we're forced to change, but that's not adapting. That's rusting our lives away. But living a practice life means we get a chance to purposely, consciously, continually adapt to changing circumstances. Peter couldn't have imagined, or maybe he could have, he was a damn bright guy, what this COVID-19 pandemic would do to every aspect of daily performances. My feeling is that the people who are going to continue through this, adapting through this, are going to find out some ways to accommodate the worst of the dangers, but also continue to be good to themselves and others and bring out some new practices that they can demonstrate will always work better if we have to live with this condition indefinitely. That would be something I would love to come up with. I think I will. Practice is a visible gauge of my emotional and social intelligence. Practice is a visible gauge of my emotional and social intelligence. Some of you may not know that kind of academic jargon: social intelligence, emotional intelligence. There's also something called adaptive intelligence now that has to do with sort of the deeper patterns of our personalities and how life has conditioned us so far. But if you want to know what practice has brought out in my emotional and social intelligence, don't just listen to these words: I'm perfect. No. Watch what I do. Watch what I do in changing circumstances. Watch what I do. And here's the kicker. I have to watch what I do because I'm living in this being right now, and I can't close my eyes to what practice makes me do. So if I took that mulligan, I saw it, didn't get away with a thing. And I banged the second shot about 2 yards and it dribbled down another hole. And what a silly waste of my honesty. Practice composes my network of networks, wherein I establish my personal brand. I find natural teachers and earn my reputation for integrity and excellence. Practice composes my network of networks. Belonging, joining, a lot of that happening now with social media and with technologies like Zoom, where I'm regularly connecting with people from all over who some have never met before. But if we keep that frequency and even add to that frequency of connecting, then we become part of each other's networks. And in that regard, brand grows. It doesn't grow from within us. Brand, what people think of it instantly when they hear my name or the name of this podcast, Practice with a question mark, brand comes to their mind. And of course, if I get feedback that that's something that they appreciate, makes me happy. But next in this notion of practice is that I find natural teachers. And that's a wonderful part about extending a network. You never quite know whether it be the custodian that I used to see in our library at the university when I could go back and do some work there as an emeritus professor. I always saw the same gentleman at the same time I would come in. I always had a joke, and I always got a moment of not only a nice laugh together, but a touch of wisdom and a deep feeling of appreciation for him keeping that particular floor of the library dust-free, clutter-free. That was his place of accomplishment and results, and I learned a great deal from him. I miss him now that the school's been closed because of the COVID-19. And finally, this notion of reputation for integrity and excellence. I've learned so much about Peter Vail after his death from people I've had conversations recorded with. You've heard them about how they felt about Peter as a teacher, as a dean, as a scholar, writer, as a consultant, a speaker. Reputation of Peter Vail, if anything, I hope will grow in its importance to my field, management education. And I'm doing something to that effect to keep that growth going, because as each of us passes away, there's lovely things hopefully said in a eulogy or an obituary, then we kind of fade. So why not leave a strong reputation of integrity and caring and fun with people after we pass along? So I'm going to give it my best. Practice is my main provider. I can make a living when I continually align results that I learn to skillfully produce with results sought by an employer or a customer. So if there's not too many other prominent reasons for you to think about the nature of your practice or living a life that has a great deal of practice in it, meaning your life has practice in it, then think about it as being a main provider. Continually aligning results, remember, working to achieve those results that are also aligned with the results that people want to employ you for, to pay you for, to otherwise reward you for. So among the various practices, I can tell you this: I'm not going to ever earn a nickel or even a tiny little trophy as a golfer, but I've made a good living for my family as a teacher. And I'm thankful for that, because I found something that was prominent in how I expressed myself in life, teaching. And I started doing it very, very young in a swimming pool, teaching little kids to overcome their fear of water, right up to this moment where I see this podcasting as a teaching practice. So thank goodness I found that. I don't know many other things I do well enough at a practice state to make a nickel. Practice is my investment. I give it my best yet. Practice is my investment. I give it my best qualities and abilities yet, and it returns to me continuous improvements and fresh knowledge. Now that is an ROI, a return on investment. Through whatever practice you choose, I certainly choose teaching. I give it my best abilities and qualities. And in return, I get continuous improvement. And more importantly, even than that, I get fresh knowledge of what works, being David Fearon. That kind of pragmatic knowledge is what I go by ultimately. and having it fresh, particularly as there's so much change in our lives right now, is some kind of a promise, if you will, that if we proceed on fresh knowledge, we'll get ahead further and better than if we go to the stale, even published knowledge that sits there in our history. Couple more. Practice is my incubator. Creative ideas bloom while problem solving, which I nurture with the inner conversations that I hold about advancing my practice. Creative ideas bloom while problem solving. And as we problem solve, we tend to have a conversation in our own heads like, what the hell is this? I've never seen this before. Wow, that's pretty intriguing. So having that startup conversation in my head gets me to do something differently. And then there's a payoff for that, or a punishment leading to more effort and a payoff. That's the incubation process. Those ideas that pop up in your head get incubated that way. I remember once I was trying to come up with a new theme for my innovation course, and I was listening to an interview with Harrison Ford, and they said, well, what did you like the most about making those Raiders of the Lost Ark movies? And he said, working in concert with others to bring new ideas to life. Working in concert with others to bring new ideas for life. Bing! The light bulb over my head. And I thought, concert, music, ideas that become innovations are rarely produced by an individual. They must work in concert with others who can flesh things out, bring the tools to bear, all of that. But this notion of bringing new ideas to life, wow. I built a whole course around that. And I think the students got it, because that gave them a purpose in business to bring new ideas to life, to the lives of others, not just to take them out of the shadows of one's imagination, but actually make life better for others and make a profit doing it. Practice is my self-guidance system. It continually locates opportunities favoring and developing my strengths. Yeah, I'm sorry, but there's other aspects of what I do that aren't of a practice nature. And if anything, it points up my weaknesses. So I am favoring where I feel the strongest. And practice is sort of like my guidance system. It turns my attention to where I can learn something, meet someone, try something, hear, experience, savor something that's likely to bring even more of my strengths to bear. And as they do, I'll get stronger. And I saw Peter doing that, because once he could start thinking aloud in conversation, which is his most comfortable format, I believe, as teacher, I could get that sense that, he felt that there was something to look forward to every week that we did this. It was building on his strengths, while so many other aspects of his day were simply reminding him of his physical limitations. I'm inspired by that. Practice is my life laboratory. Each move forward in uncertainty tests what I know and can do against new realities. Boy, if there was ever a time when we have to recognize that we're living in conditions which have a lot more questions and answers, where the level of uncertainty is real, palpable, then practice gives me a way of having a positive view of all that, saying, I'm entering the laboratory. I'm testing my knowledge and abilities and skills to see what new realities will make me do the same or differently. Every day is an experiment, and it's not just a cliche. If you look at your practice pulling you out into these uncharted places in your life, you're going to learn a lot. And finally, I wrote, practice is my puzzle and mystery to keep on solving. How do I sustain this concerted efforts to make a difference in turbulent times? Big puzzle. Huge mystery. How do I sustain this concerted effort to make a difference in turbulent times? Or as Peter Vale wrote and discussed, in permanent whitewater. If I were to start over and build a curriculum for management learners and courses within that curriculum, I would cast the entire design as a school for detectives, not to find the criminals, but to be thrilled by still another mystery, another puzzle, another problem, another twist and turn, and have that sense of, I've got to know, that feeling of, I've got to ask a few more questions here, ma'am, that we saw in our old detective stories on TV. Just one more question, ma'am, Columbo. Yeah, that's the way that they can make organizations adapt and change, because they would show, in all honesty, the enthusiasm for discovering more pieces of the puzzle to put into place and more mysteries ahead. Who knows? But that's sort of the way I've been doing it for me. That's what my practice is. It's my puzzle. It's my mystery to keep on solving. So thank you for indulging this whole period of time that I've talked, not in conversation, but hopefully so you get a better idea of who I am and why this podcast series will keep on going. Lots more puzzles, lots more mysteries, lots more wonderful people to add to my network. So thank you. Thanks for listening to the Practice Podcast, where we discuss practice with a capital P. If you'd like to hear more, listen in on Spotify, Podomatic, and Apple Podcasts, or go to inactionresearch.com/podcast-page. And if you'd like to learn more about social inaction and the nature of practice, head over to inactionresearch.com for more information. Thank you for supporting this show. We look forward to hearing from you soon.